Both Avatar and Avatar: The Way of Water do something that, from a screenwriting perspective, doesn't make any sense. Right in the middle of the movie, they both stop all plot development and show a long sequence where, at first glance, it seems like nothing important happens. Characters spend a huge chunk of the movie either flying or swimming around. No plot development, no tension, no arc. A scene that could be completely cut without affecting the story. These scenes are my favorite part of both movies, but James Cameron actually had to fight hard to keep the flying sequence in the first Avatar. According to Cameron, the studio execs said the scene went against basic storytelling principles on how to pace a movie.
And they were complaining about the flying scenes. Why does this flying scene go on so long? You've already proved the point, it doesn't advance the narrative, it doesn't advance the character. I said, you're right on every count, you've ticked every box, like a good studio executive.
But if those executives are right about the scene not advancing the narrative or the characters, why keep the long flying scene in the first one, and the even longer underwater scene in the second one? And why does keeping them long work so well? To fully understand how the studio execs got Avatar wrong, let's first talk about pacing.
1, 2, 3, get up! Next!
People use the word pacing to describe movies all the time. There's fast-paced movies, which have lots of action or quick-witted humor. And then there's the badly paced movies, which is often just a catch-all for a movie someone didn't like, especially if they found it slow or boring. Avatar clearly falls under the fast-paced category with its frequent and incredible action sequences, which makes a slower scene like the flying sequence stand out that much more. Yet for a word that's used so often, pacing is actually pretty difficult to define. Common definitions will say it's a movie's speed, how fast it unfolds, but that's just a word that means the same thing as pace. And speed doesn't explain what makes a movie's pacing good or bad. Yet the concept is crucial to making scenes work, and filmmakers regularly grapple with the pace of their scenes.
There used to be these beautiful drone shots of Dave and Maddie riding on this motorcycle. Then you put the scene together and the scene's too long and it's just, well, here are the gunshots, see him arrive. Pacing wise, we also kind of want to get to the island and get to the mystery.
So whether you're doing drone shots in Glass Onion or flying shots in Avatar, the success of your scene seems to depend on this hard to define idea of pace. So how do you nail it down? The answer lies in perhaps the fastest paced movie of all time. So let's get the party started.
Herr Kapellmeister! More rock and roll!
The movie 123 moves at an almost impossible speed, and that's no accident. Writer-director Billy Wilder wanted to make a comedy where the fast pacing was itself a joke. In his words, just the speed was funny.
Now, I want you to paint this crest on the door of a car. How long will it take? That's too long.
But the speed of this movie doesn't just come from quick dialogue. It's in the framing, the narrative, and even just a well-timed camera move.
Bye.
Bye. Missy, wait a minute, Phyllis.
There is a sort of a misconception that pace and speaking quickly is the same thing. You can have pace by people not speaking quickly. It depends on the cut. It depends on the rhythm of the thing.
We want right of inspection. I veto it. I thought so.
Throughout 123, James Cagney famously rattles off line after line of impossibly complicated orders to get Otto transformed into an aristocrat.
Tight, not too wide, not too narrow, not too fancy.
But you don't need quick dialogue for a fast pace. While the stylists get Otto ready, even more characters enter the room, making the frame even busier. Billy Wilder also sticks to the master and avoids close-ups, giving our eye too much to look at all at once, and we end up with a Renaissance painting on steroids. It's not just that the dialogue is fast or we get huge camera movements, it's the combination of all the small movements within the frame that makes it so busy. Billy Wilder also has the camera move with the action, even if it's subtle, so we can sense the movement without necessarily noticing it.
Wait! Who's paying for this foolishness?
123 has the conventional speed that we associate with fast pace, but sequences like these also show why pacing isn't such a simple concept to define. Many of the scenes are actually pretty long, and they don't always have fast dialogue or rapid camera movements. Whether or not a scene feels like it goes for too long depends on more than just character dialogue or camera speed. It depends on harder to generalize elements of the scene, like shot composition, carefully choreographed movement, and editing.
To hell with the revolution, and to hell with Khrushchev!
The hell with Frank Sinatra.
So when Avatar studio execs said the flying scene went too long, I think they missed the point, because the setup and technical execution of the flying sequence actually makes it literally and figuratively fly by. In the scene, Jake Sully goes up to the Hallelujah Mountains to tame and fly his own mountain banshee as part of his initiation into the tribe. At the very start, the scene uses contrast to create a sense of scale. We first see the effort it takes to get to the top of these huge mountains. Then Jake has to navigate a small, cramped rock, and finally he soars through the mountains once difficult to get through. In the flying flying itself, Cameron alternates between wide flying shots and close-ups, capturing both the visual spectacle and the moment's emotional core. This alternating focus adds tension, like when we focus on Jake so we don't see the obstacles until he does. And this buildup also leads to visual payoffs. When Jake gets the hang of flying, the camera finally slows down, and both Jake and the viewer earn the incredible wide shots the scene is now famous for.
Shut up and fly straight!
Because this flying exists after those high stakes and initial failures, the length of the sequence feels natural. We enjoy seeing Jake master what once almost killed him.
Oh, shit!
Avatar and 1, 2, 3 are completely different movies, yet they both create a fast pace despite having long, drawn-out scenes. Getting auto-prepared in 1, 2, 3 happens in a single office with mostly simple wide shots, and the flying scene in Avatar isn't very complicated compared to the movie's other action scenes. But neither feels too long, because they earn their simplicity. Wilder creates fast pace through character blocking and subtle camera moves, and Cameron creates fast pace through tension and contrast. These long scenes in such fast-paced movies expose the paradox at the core of pacing. Fast pacing isn't about going fast, it's about knowing when not to. In the book Empty Moments, Professor Leo Charney talks about how movies often present their narratives as a series of emotional highs and lows, which helps create a sense of progression, tension, and resolution. This idea, which Charney refers to as peaks and valleys, means storytelling requires slower moments so that the viewer can appreciate and digest the fast ones. And Billy Wilder understood this concept all too well. When describing 1, 2, 3, he said, "Let's make the fastest picture in the world, and give the actors, in order to make it seem fast, some slower scenes too." For every chaotic scene, there is a slower one, like Mac and Phyllis arguing about their marriage or a long take of slow dancing. And slowness even happens within the fast scenes themselves. The later dancing sequence may seem like non-stop speed, but it feels that much more chaotic because of the contrast within the scene itself, its peaks and its valleys. Up until the flying scene in Avatar, all the movie's world building has created more peaks than valleys. For the first time, the viewer doesn't have to see or learn something new, and like Jake himself, all that previous knowledge of the world can finally sink in. But there's more to it than that. The studio execs seem to only recall the flying itself, but in the scene's supposed downtime, we also get setups for future payoffs. Through the flying, we see Jake's still uneasy relationship with the rest of the tribe, and his growing relationship with Neytiri. We also fly past the Tree of Souls and several animals on Pandora that become crucial to the story later on. So the subtlety of pace means that even within the valleys, we get productivity. We can both enjoy the downtime and also use that time to better appreciate the future peaks. It's from this idea of peaks and valleys that we can really understand what pacing means. It's the rhythm of a story. Like rhythm in music, storytelling has periods of emphasis and periods of silence, of peaks and valleys. Film criticism actually borrows a lot of words from music to describe storytelling. Words like rhythm, story beats, or even a crescendo. Because good stories naturally have a sort of musical flow, which leads to a strange phenomenon. Lots of well-paced movies not only have a strong diegetic relationship with their musical score, but characters even perform the score within the story itself. Once you're on the lookout for this, it shows up everywhere. In 1, 2, 3, Fräulein sings the movie's main theme. And in Mad Max Fury Road, this happens. And Avatar does the same thing. The Na'vi move with the pulsing of the earth and the score. And that synchronicity between the world and the score itself shows the superhuman relationship the Na'vi have with Pandora. I'm not saying a movie with a strong relationship with its score automatically has better pacing. What I am saying is that if the score does blend into the editing, the pace, or the story itself, then that means the movie synchronized all its elements together, which tends to lead to well-paced movies like 1, 2, 3, Whiplash, and Avatar. And I think this idea shows what good pacing really means. Good pacing is like a well-designed roller coaster ride, a symphony of techniques with the peaks and valleys working together, knowing when to speed up and when to slow down.
Movies can start to feel slow, right? You got to play it just right.
Well, yeah, hopefully the idea is you're creating rhythm.
Yeah.
And you're sailing on that rhythm, and you're going with that rhythm, and you can break up the rhythms and everything, but that's what's stopping it from just being a talky drag.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I break your concentration?
But if you ask James Cameron why he kept the flying scene so long, he doesn't talk about creating rhythm and knowing how to handle it. In fact, he mentions a director who rejected the idea entirely.
You've ticked every box, like a good studio executive. But guess what? I want to see it. And I extrapolate from that, and Stanley Kubrick was a firm proponent of this principle. If I want to see it, my cognitive leap is there are going to be lots of people that want to see it.
Does the concept of peaks and valleys even apply to a director like Stanley Kubrick? Consider his 1987 film Full Metal Jacket. The first 45 minutes take place at boot camp before soldiers ship off to Vietnam, and the two main characters, Private Pyle and Drill Sergeant Hartman, don't even show up in the rest of the movie. It's essentially a separate short film. As a studio exec might point out, the story and characters don't impact the plot of the rest of the movie. It's peaks and valleys for an unrelated story. And Stanley Kubrick makes these unconventional pacing choices all the time. The Hal subplot in 2001: A Space Odyssey is another short film within a film, and that movie, along with most of Kubrick's catalog, has a lot more valleys than peaks. It's clear that in his movies, Kubrick didn't prioritize pacing or rhythm. On the contrary, he has no issue with disjointed, elongated movies. Like the flying scene in Avatar, he doesn't care if scenes are out of context or go for too long, and that choice helps us feel like his characters, whose repetition also leads them to their slow descent into madness, best characterized by the famous Kubrick stare. But how far can a director go? To be honest, I'm not always entirely sure how I feel about Kubrick's famously slow pace. Full Metal Jacket has an incredible short film within a film, but the rest of the movie does meander quite a bit. Is that creative choice a clever symbol for the meaninglessness of the Vietnam War itself, or does the choice hurt the story by making it too unfocused? That answer, like pacing itself, is impossible to fully resolve. But that's the beauty of Kubrick or Cameron's movies. No matter how I feel about them during a rewatch, I'm forever grateful that I got to see what the director wanted to see, not what some studio exec thought an audience would want. Pacing definitely matters, especially when a moment feels too rushed, or a scene drags out longer than it should. But I also think relying on pacing to explain a movie risks reducing storytelling to its purpose. If a filmmaker's primary concern is pacing, then every moment must exist for some objective reason, instead of because it's part of the filmmaker's vision. So for directors like Stanley Kubrick and James Cameron, good pacing is a requirement that is not only too restrictive, but it also doesn't matter. Or at least they don't worry about it, and for great directors, the problem seems to sort itself out. And James Cameron has definitely doubled down on this idea in Avatar: The Way of Water. Not only is the water sequence much longer than the flying sequence in Avatar 1, but it has even less of the conventional narrative or character advancement. They can't even talk.
When you're underwater, there's no dialogue. There may be nothing else but the music to tell you how to feel. Characters who are conflicted about what they should do next, but they can't go, oh, what do I do? Because they're underwater, so the music has to do that.
The purpose is to be present, to be in that world, to be enjoying what's happening, to sustain a feeling. So those flying scenes actually did have a big purpose. That's when Jake and Neytiri fell in love. And I got into a big fight with the studio.
One of the things I was thinking when I was watching Avatar was when I did Kill Bill, I had these grandiose visions in my head of the experience of watching the movie, and I actually wanted it to be more like a ride. I don't think I did that. And when I saw Avatar, I go, that's the ride. That's the ride I was trying to do.
The flying scene in Avatar 1 and the underwater scene in Avatar 2 show Cameron's mastery over his production, the combination of score, characterization, and special effects to create the ultimate ride. And these scenes didn't come to fruition because of some application of the textbook definition of pacing. It may not sound intuitive at first, but directors like Cameron and Kubrick don't really care about pacing. They care about what they want to see, and that itself creates a purpose. It doesn't always matter if that purpose goes against conventional peaks and valleys. Studio execs got Avatar wrong because they worked in the wrong direction. Purpose comes from what you want, not some screenwriting book or some pretentious video essay on pacing that tells you what to do. So good pacing isn't just about speed or action, it's about creating tension, balancing spectacle with emotional resonance, and earning the big payoffs through well-crafted setups. But when filmmakers get it right, even scenes that go against conventional wisdom can turn into the most memorable and most impactful moments in a movie. So when you watch a story unfold or write your own, remember that it doesn't have to check all the boxes of what makes a story well-paced. Instead, think like James Cameron, because I want to see it, now you see it.
Let's go!